Stop for just a brief moment, because what you are about to hear may completely transform the way you understand love, heartbreak, and the person you believe is your soulmate. What if I told you that your soulmate is slowly releasing the love you share? Not because they never cared about you, not because destiny has abandoned you, but because something much deeper is taking place beneath everything you can currently see. What if the distance that keeps you awake during the night is not the ending of your story, but the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of your life? Most people spend years desperately searching for answers, blaming themselves or trying with all their strength to hold on to someone who appears to be drifting away. They convince themselves that if love is genuine, then it should never change. But what if that very belief is the reason they remain trapped inside their suffering? The truth is that some of the deepest heartbreaks can conceal some of the greatest awakenings. Sometimes the person who walks away becomes the mirror that finally shows you everything you were meant to discover about yourself. Every unanswered message, every period of silence, every tear you hide, and every restless night carries a lesson that most people never slow down enough to recognize. So before you tell yourself that you have lost the love of your life, before you allow fear to decide how your story ends, stay with me until the very end. Because what you are about to understand may not only transform the way you look at your soulmate, it may permanently change the way you understand yourself. The most painful moments in love rarely begin at the exact moment when two people stop communicating. They usually begin much earlier, during those quiet moments when one heart begins sensing that something unseen has shifted. Perhaps the conversations slowly become shorter. The warmth you once felt in every glance gradually turns into emotional distance. Something inside you tells you that the connection is beginning to slip away. Yet your mind desperately searches for explanations that might make the uncomfortable feeling disappear. This emotional separation can feel almost like losing a piece of yourself, especially when you have convinced yourself that this person was your soulmate. Yet underneath all of that pain is a hidden invitation that very few people recognize. Emotional distance is often not simply about punishment or rejection. Sometimes it becomes a doorway into awakening. When someone begins releasing the love you once shared, your immediate reaction is usually fear. Fear tells you that you are no longer enough, that you have somehow failed, or that something precious has been taken away from you forever. But fear has an extraordinary ability to distort what is actually happening. It makes the loss appear larger, while concealing the opportunity hidden inside it. The discomfort you feel is not created only because another person's emotions are changing. It is also exposing everything inside you that has been waiting to be noticed for many years. Love has a strange and powerful way of bringing to the surface what ordinary life allows us to keep hidden. When everything feels safe and secure, many emotional wounds remain buried underneath routines, distractions, familiar habits, and the comfort of having someone beside you. But the possibility of losing someone can suddenly tear through those protective layers. Old fears of rejection, abandonment, loneliness, and not being worthy begin rising with an intensity you may never have expected. It can feel as though the relationship created these wounds. Yet, in reality, the relationship may simply have uncovered something that was already quietly existing beneath the surface. This is why emotional separation can become one of the strongest catalysts for personal transformation. The pain forces you to ask questions that you might never have considered while everything seemed peaceful and perfect. Why does losing this person feel as though you are losing your entire identity? Why does another person's decision seem capable of determining how valuable you believe you are? Why does their silence create such overwhelming panic inside your mind? These questions can be painful to face, but they lead you toward a deeper understanding of who you really are. Many people respond to this kind of pain by chasing even harder, believing that more effort will somehow bring back what appears to be disappearing. Yet constant pursuit often becomes an attempt to run away from inner suffering rather than a true expression of love. Instead of turning inward and listening to what the pain is trying to reveal, they place all of their attention on changing another person's thoughts, emotions, or decisions. Without realizing it, they delay the very healing their soul is asking them to begin. Real transformation begins when you stop treating emotional pain like an enemy and start recognizing it as a messenger. Every difficult emotion contains information. Jealousy can reveal insecurity. Desperation can expose emotional dependence. Anger can sometimes hide unprocessed grief. Loneliness can reveal the relationship you have neglected with yourself. None of these realizations are easy. In fact, they can be deeply uncomfortable. But every one of them gives you an opportunity to become stronger, wiser, more self-aware, and emotionally grounded. Ironically, the exact moment when someone seems to be letting you go can become the moment when you finally begin finding yourself. As you release the desperate desire to control another person's heart, you slowly reconnect with your own heart. Confidence begins growing from standing firmly within yourself instead of constantly needing reassurance from someone else. Peace begins taking the place of panic, and eventually, whether your paths come together again or move permanently in separate directions becomes less important than the person you are becoming through the experience. Within that transformation, you begin to understand something profound. The deepest purpose of love was never simply to keep two people together. Love can also awaken a hidden strength that might never have appeared while everything familiar remained secure. One of the greatest misunderstandings about love is the idea that holding on as tightly as possible proves how deeply you care. Many people spend years believing that if they cannot stop thinking about someone, if they are terrified of losing them every day, or if they feel incomplete whenever that person is absent, then what they are experiencing must automatically be true love. But those intense emotions can often come from attachment rather than love itself. At first, attachment and love can feel almost identical. Both can create powerful emotions, deep longing, and an overwhelming desire to remain close. Yet eventually, they lead the heart in completely different directions. Attachment is powered by fear. It fears abandonment, rejection, loneliness, uncertainty, and the possibility of being replaced. It constantly asks whether they are going to stay, whether they still love you, whether they are thinking about you, and what might happen if they suddenly find someone else. These questions never seem to end because attachment searches for security through another person instead of developing stability within yourself. Slowly, the relationship can become an emotional lifeline where your happiness depends almost entirely on someone else's attention, behavior, mood, and choices. When that attention begins decreasing, panic quickly takes the place of peace. Love, however, comes from a very different place. Genuine love does not need to imprison another person's soul or demand endless reassurance. It appreciates another person's presence without attempting to control every decision they make. It allows closeness while still respecting individuality. Instead of believing that you cannot survive without someone, genuine love quietly understands that your life is more meaningful and richer because this person is part of it. But your identity does not vanish if circumstances change. This kind of love creates emotional freedom instead of emotional dependence. And when your soulmate appears to be releasing the love you share, attachment immediately interprets the situation as a personal failure. It begins creating painful stories inside your mind. Maybe you were not good enough. Maybe you said the wrong thing. Maybe someone else is better than you. Maybe you should try harder. Maybe if you become more attractive, more successful, more available, or more understanding, you can somehow make them choose you again. The mind can create an endless collection of these stories because it desperately wants to regain control over something that feels uncertain. But there is a deeper truth you need to understand. You cannot force another person's heart to remain where it no longer wishes to stay. And you do not need to. Your worth was never created by their attention, and their distance cannot destroy it. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not holding tighter. Sometimes it is allowing space for both people to discover what is real without manipulation, pressure, or fear. This does not mean you stop caring. It does not mean you suddenly become cold or pretend that the connection meant nothing. It simply means you stop abandoning yourself in an attempt to keep another person from leaving. There is a profound difference between loving someone and losing yourself while trying to be loved by them. When you begin understanding that difference, something inside you changes. You stop asking, how can I make them stay? And you begin asking, what is this experience trying to teach me about myself? That single question can completely change the direction of your healing. Because perhaps this person did not enter your life only to become your permanent partner. Perhaps they entered your life to awaken something that had been sleeping inside you. Perhaps their presence showed you a depth of emotion you had never experienced before. Perhaps their absence is now teaching you a depth of self-respect you had never developed before. And perhaps the distance between you is not asking you to chase harder. Perhaps it is asking you to become whole again. Sometimes two people need distance before they can understand the true nature of their connection. Sometimes the space reveals what closeness was hiding. Sometimes silence exposes feelings that constant communication kept buried. And sometimes what feels like rejection is actually the beginning of a completely different relationship with yourself. This is why you should not immediately assume that someone's emotional withdrawal means you have failed. You are not required to prove your worth through endless effort. You are not required to convince someone to recognize your value. You are not required to beg for the love that should naturally meet you with respect, honesty, and emotional presence. Your task is to return to yourself, to become steady again, to listen to your own emotions without allowing them to control every decision, to recognize the difference between intuition and fear, to understand that missing someone does not mean you must pursue them, to realize that loving someone does not require you to abandon your own dignity, and perhaps most importantly, to understand that the end of one version of a relationship does not automatically mean the end of your capacity to love, grow, or experience something meaningful. Sometimes the relationship changes because you are changing. Sometimes the person walks away because the old version of the connection can no longer continue. And sometimes the most beautiful thing that emerges from heartbreak is not getting the person back, but getting yourself back. The person you were before fear convinced you that your happiness depended on someone else's presence. The person who could stand alone without feeling incomplete. The person who could love deeply without becoming emotionally imprisoned. The person who could experience uncertainty without immediately assuming the worst. That version of you may be waiting on the other side of this pain. So if your soulmate appears to be letting go right now, do not immediately assume that your story has failed. Pause, breathe, listen. Look beneath the surface of your emotions and ask yourself what this moment is revealing. Perhaps it is showing you where you still need healing. Perhaps it is revealing where you have confused attachment with love. Perhaps it is teaching you to stop searching for your worth in another person's response. Or perhaps it is preparing you for a form of love that is more mature, more conscious, and more free. You cannot know the final chapter yet, and you do not need to know it. Your responsibility is not to control the ending. Your responsibility is to become the person who can meet whatever ending arrives with strength, wisdom, and an open heart. Because sometimes the person you thought you needed to hold on to was actually the person who awakened your need to finally hold on to yourself. And that awakening may be the most important part of your entire love story. You may start wondering whether you simply were not attractive enough, whether you said something you should not have said, or whether another person has somehow taken your place. These thoughts can become even more convincing because attachment is constantly searching for explanations that support the fears already living inside you. The mind can become caught in a never-ending cycle of overthinking, replaying old memories, examining every conversation, searching for hidden meanings, and imagining different endings to situations that can no longer be changed. True love responds in a very different way. It can absolutely experience sadness, disappointment, loneliness, and even grief. But it does not completely abandon its dignity. It understands that another person's emotional journey cannot always be controlled, predicted, or influenced. Sometimes people change and begin moving in directions neither person expected. Sometimes unresolved emotional struggles create distance between two people. Sometimes circumstances, responsibilities, timing, or life itself create separation that neither individual consciously planned. Love can acknowledge these realities while still remaining compassionate. It does not require you to deny what you feel, but it also does not ask you to destroy your self-respect just to keep another person close. This difference becomes especially meaningful when you are experiencing heartbreak. If you mistake attachment for love, you may spend months or even years pursuing someone who has already emotionally stepped away from the relationship. Every rejection can begin to feel like another reason to try harder, while every unanswered message becomes another mystery you believe you must solve. Every moment of silence may convince you that there must be something you can do to change the situation. But the truth is that the chase can often make the wound even deeper because it strengthens the belief that your value depends on whether you can convince someone to return. Paradoxically, releasing attachment does not mean that you suddenly stop caring about someone. It means you stop allowing another person's decision to determine how valuable you believe you are. You begin to separate your identity from the relationship itself. You remember that you were a complete person before this connection appeared in your life, and you remain a complete person regardless of whether that relationship continues. Slowly, you begin rediscovering the interests you once enjoyed, the dreams you temporarily neglected, the friendships that mattered to you, and the inner strengths you may have forgotten while focusing so intensely on another person. As emotional dependence begins to loosen its grip, genuine love becomes easier to recognize because it is no longer buried beneath fear, desperation, and the constant need for reassurance. Perhaps one of the deepest lessons hidden inside an intense soulmate connection is that love reaches its healthiest form when it is freely chosen rather than desperately maintained. When you release the need to possess another person's heart, something inside you begins to change. You create room for a form of love that is built upon respect, emotional maturity, freedom, and inner stability. You no longer need another person to stay simply to prove that you are worthy of being loved. You can appreciate their presence without believing that your entire identity depends upon it. You can care deeply without abandoning yourself. You can hope for a future together without becoming emotionally destroyed by the possibility that the future may look different than you imagined. This kind of inner wholeness does not make love less powerful. In many ways, it makes love more authentic because the relationship is no longer being held together by fear. It becomes something two people are choosing rather than something one person is desperately trying to preserve. Very few experiences reveal your inner emotional world as clearly as a deeply meaningful soulmate connection. In the beginning, it may seem as though the entire relationship is about the other person, their words, their affection, their attention, their behavior, or even their absence. Your focus naturally moves toward what they are doing and what their actions might mean. But as the connection becomes deeper, something unexpected can begin to happen. Emotions may rise inside you that seem far greater than the events that triggered them. A delayed message can create an overwhelming sense of anxiety. A small misunderstanding can awaken a level of sadness that feels difficult to explain. The simple possibility of losing the relationship can feel strangely similar to losing a part of yourself. These intense reactions may suggest that the relationship is touching emotional places inside you that existed long before you ever met this person. Every meaningful relationship can function like a mirror. It reflects your strengths, your capacity for trust, your ability to receive affection, and your willingness to be vulnerable, but it can also reveal the parts of yourself that you rarely want to acknowledge. When everything feels peaceful, that mirror may show you your ability to experience joy, generosity, trust, affection, hope, and emotional openness. But when distance appears, when conflict develops, or when uncertainty enters the relationship, the reflection can change completely. Suddenly, hidden fears may rise to the surface. Insecurities you thought you had overcome can return. Old emotional wounds may become visible again. The relationship can expose beliefs about yourself that you have carried quietly for years. What you see through the connection is therefore not always a reason to judge the other person's behavior. Sometimes it is an invitation to understand yourself on a much deeper level. Many people believe that their soulmate is responsible for all the pain they are experiencing, and while another person's actions can certainly hurt you, the intensity of your emotional response may also be connected to older patterns that were already present within you. If you constantly fear abandonment, for example, the relationship may be activating an old wound that has influenced your emotional life for many years. If you believe you must earn someone's love by constantly sacrificing your own needs, the connection may be exposing a deeply rooted belief that your value depends upon pleasing other people. If jealousy becomes overwhelming, it may reveal a lack of inner confidence that existed before this particular relationship ever began. If silence immediately makes you believe you are being rejected, it may point toward a deeper fear of being forgotten or replaced. And if every disagreement feels like the end of the relationship, there may be an old fear of loss underneath that reaction. This is one reason intense soulmate connections can feel so transformative. They do not simply provide companionship or romantic excitement. They can uncover truths about you that ordinary relationships might never bring into awareness. The person standing in front of you becomes a reflection of your internal emotional landscape. Their presence can illuminate the parts of you that are already healthy, secure, and capable of love, while their distance can expose the places where healing is still needed. Their affection may show you how deeply you can connect, while their absence may reveal how much of your emotional stability you have placed in another person's hands. This process can be uncomfortable because it challenges the version of yourself you have carefully created. It asks you to look beyond appearances and confront feelings you may have avoided for years. It asks you to become honest about what you fear, what you need, what you believe about yourself, and why certain situations affect you so intensely. The natural temptation is to focus completely on changing the other person. You may convince yourself that if they became more affectionate, more attentive, more communicative, or more committed, then all of your emotional suffering would finally disappear. You might imagine that if they simply gave you enough reassurance, answered your messages more quickly, showed more interest, or promised a secure future, every insecurity inside you would finally become silent. Yet even when the relationship improves, unresolved emotional wounds can remain beneath the surface, waiting for another difficult moment to awaken them again. Lasting peace cannot come entirely from controlling another person's behavior. It develops through understanding the emotions that their behavior awakens inside you. This realization can completely change the purpose of the relationship. Instead of constantly asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" you begin asking, "What is this experience revealing about me?" Instead of immediately reacting to every painful emotion, you become interested in understanding where that emotion comes from. That one shift can transform emotional suffering into an opportunity for self-discovery. You become curious instead of consumed. You begin observing your thoughts rather than automatically believing every thought that enters your mind. You learn to sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of immediately trying to escape them. You allow yourself to experience fear, sadness, disappointment, and uncertainty without allowing those emotions to control every decision you make. Each fear can become a clue. Each disappointment can become an opportunity to recognize a belief that may no longer serve you. Each emotional trigger can show you another part of your inner world that deserves attention, understanding, and compassion. Perhaps the most unexpected realization is that the soulmate you once believed was meant only to love you may also be the person who introduces you to parts of yourself you had never completely understood. Their role in your life may be deeper than simply remaining beside you forever. Whether they stay with you or eventually choose another path, the mirror they placed before your inner world may already have served a profound purpose. The relationship may have shown you where you are strong, where you are vulnerable, where you still seek validation, and where you are capable of growing beyond the person you once believed yourself to be. The greatest journey may therefore never have been only toward another person's heart. It may have been toward a deeper understanding of your own heart. And that journey begins when you develop the courage to see yourself honestly, without judgment, and to embrace even the hidden parts of yourself with patience rather than fear. When someone begins to release the love you once shared, the mind often rushes toward one painful conclusion. It is over, and it will remain over forever. Every unanswered message can feel like proof. Every quiet moment can seem like confirmation. Every sign of emotional distance may appear to announce that the entire story has finally ended. The human heart naturally struggles with uncertainty, so the mind often tries to create certainty as quickly as possible, even when that certainty is painful. It can feel easier to tell yourself that everything is finished than to remain in the uncomfortable space of not knowing what another person truly feels or what life may eventually bring. Yet life rarely unfolds in such simple and permanent ways. Emotional distance does not always mean that love has completely disappeared. Sometimes distance becomes part of a transformation that neither person fully understands while they are moving through it. Sometimes people need space to confront themselves before they can understand what they genuinely want. People often imagine that love should move in a perfectly straight line, becoming stronger every day without interruption. But meaningful relationships rarely develop in such a simple pattern. They move through different seasons. There are periods of closeness when everything feels effortless. There are moments of confusion when neither person understands what is happening. There are periods of personal growth when each individual must confront parts of themselves separately. There are also times when life creates circumstances that cannot be solved simply by loving each other more. Responsibilities change. Priorities shift. Emotional wounds become impossible to ignore. People sometimes need to step back because they are dealing with struggles that they cannot resolve while remaining completely focused on the relationship. Just as nature contains winters that appear quiet and lifeless while the ground is preparing for another season of growth, relationships can also enter seasons of silence. From the outside, nothing may seem to be happening. Communication may decrease. Familiar routines may disappear. The connection may appear frozen. But beneath the surface, important changes can still be taking place. People can be thinking, reflecting, healing, questioning old beliefs, and discovering truths they were previously unable to see. Silence does not automatically tell you what the future will be. It simply tells you that the present moment has entered a different season, and this is where emotional maturity becomes important. You do not have to force an answer before the answer is ready. You do not have to chase someone simply because you are afraid of losing them. You do not have to turn uncertainty into a personal judgment against yourself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow space to exist while continuing to take care of your own inner world. Let the silence teach you patience. Let the distance reveal what you truly need. Let the uncertainty remind you that your life cannot be placed on pause while you wait for another person's decision.